Hi, my name is Peg Alloy, and I'm going to be making pumpkin spice cupcakes with cream cheese frosting today. This recipe, I actually just introduced this recently. I make cupcakes for a cafe in Albany, New York, and we just keep it kind of basic, just chocolate and vanilla, but then for the seasons I thought it would be really interesting to try some new things. So I went through all the recipes that I had, and I'm in the process of collecting a lot of my mother's old recipes that come from her family and various other places. And I'm actually collecting them into a book because when my father passed away, I really wanted to collect some of his recipes in a book, and I thought, well, why don't we put Mom and Dad together? So anyway, we'll get started here. One of the first ingredients that it calls for is just a cup and a half of dark brown sugar. You can use light brown. You might want to add a little more molasses if you do that. And of course, brown sugar is a little bit lumpy, so you want to make sure you don't have, this is nice fresh brown sugar though, so I don't see any lumps in here. But you want to make sure you flatten them out, because sometimes it's a nice little surprise to get a little wad of melted brown sugar in your cupcake, but you might not want that. So the next thing we're going to do is sift all these dry ingredients together, and we start with 3 cups of just ordinary flour. The nice thing that about this recipe is that you can make it all organic, and if you can get as many organic ingredients as possible, this recipe can be a totally organic one. So you can get organic and or unbleached flour in most places. This also calls for 2 teaspoons of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt. And you can use sea salt if you like. You want to use finely ground salt though. Some sea salt's a bit coarse and it might be too coarse for the recipe. If you do only have coarse salt, you can grind it in a mortar and pestle. That works fine. And our other dry ingredients are 3½ teaspoons of cinnamon and a teaspoon of allspice. And then I use just ½ teaspoon of ginger. So I just kind of go like this to sift these all together. All right, and obviously you can use a sifter for this job too. And I'm going to dump this in here. You can just kind of mix this, actually let's use the spoon. Mix these dry ingredients together with the wooden spoon. Again, if you've already gotten your lumps out of your brown sugar, although then when you add the flour it tends to form these lumps again, so it's a never-ending Zen process getting the lumps out of your brown sugar. But this looks pretty good. You can see it's this lovely kind of granulated looking mixture. It smells fantastic because of all the spice. So what I do here, I actually just put the butter right in here and the oil. So I'm sorry, this calls for 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and let it cool a little bit before you use it. And then 1¼ cups of salad oil. I use canola. You could probably use, you can use whatever you want. I wouldn't use olive or something like that, but canola's, or what's the Europeans call rapeseed oil, is pretty good all-purpose. Corn oil is, I think, maybe a little heavy for this recipe. So just to kind of get this going, I'm not going to use the mixer yet. You could make this whole recipe with a wooden spoon, frankly. Just like anything you can. You know, we just like to use mixers because it's convenient. But I just want to sort of moisten the batter with the oil, just kind of get it more or less stirred in there. There's no real science to this, just so it's all, you don't see any dry stuff sticking out there. And then what we're going to do is start getting these wet ingredients ready. Now normally this recipe calls for 4 large eggs. I only had jumbo available to me today, so we're going to try 3 jumbo, and that should work about right. You want to make sure your wet ingredients are really well mixed. So you want to, just so you don't have to stir them, and getting toughen the cake batter is the reason you don't want to do too much stirring. That's pretty good. You want your eggs to be room temperature when you're baking. This is very important because the chemical activity of all your ingredients are actually affected by temperature, and too much cold can actually slow things down a little bit. So we have 2 tablespoons of molasses. This is organic blackstrap molasses. If you can get just the good old-fashioned kind. Then we have about 1/4 cup of sour cream. You also want this to come to room temperature. for the same reason that I mentioned before. You can use a little more sour cream. I've used up to a half a cup in this recipe, and it doesn't hurt it one bit. It adds moisture and a nice texture and some really great flavor. So, it's sticking to the bottom of the bowl as well. So you can dump this in here. I'm going to use a hand mixer today because that's what I'm comfortable with. But if you've got a, you know, a nice big stand mixer, that works fine. So you've got your wet ingredients in here. And this is going to look like a very thick batter. And you're going to be like, oh gosh, this is not going to make a good cake. This is more like a cookie or a bar. But when you start to whip it up, and then once you add the pumpkin, it gets a lot looser. So now we're actually going to take the electric mixer and mix this up a little bit better right before we add the pumpkin, just to make sure. And you don't have to have it really high. Again, over mixing a cake batter can make it really tough, and you don't want that. So we've added our pumpkin in here. See this beautiful contrast of color there. So we're just going to mix this up. And I'm not mixing it a whole lot, but you'll notice it instantly gets lighter in color and a lot fluffier in texture. And then you just want to scrape the sides of the bowl so everything's mixed together. And there you have this beautiful pumpkin colored batter, and you can see it's a lot lighter and looser than it was. So now we are going to fill our muffin tins. The key to making cupcakes in muffin tins is you want to fill the batter between a half and a 3/4 full. You don't want to make it too full, but if you don't have enough, they're not going to like puff up really nice. So because I'm used to making jumbo cupcakes back home, but these this is a sort of standard size. So you should, from this recipe, it's actually a fairly large recipe, so you should be able to probably get at least 2 dozen. So anyway, a spoon is an easy way to do this. If you have the big jumbo tins, you can use a cup, you know, that's got a little spout, and that can be easier. But with this, you really just want to get in here. See, this spoon is really the perfect size. That's like 3/4 full right there. And this batter isn't too wet and gloppy, so you can kind of, as long as it's not dripping any, see now it's doing that, so you want to make sure it's not doing that. These all look pretty full and pretty good, so this one's ready to go in the oven. So we're going to pop this in. So we have the oven preheated at 350, and these are going to go in. And the baking time actually depends on what size muffin cups you're using. I use jumbos, like I said, most of the time, and those usually take about 20 minutes. You want to check them after 20 minutes. And the way to tell if they're done is if they're solid on the top, if you see the least little bit of liquidy moisture on the top, they're obviously not even near done. But press them lightly. If they spring back, it's done. If it's still a bit soft, you can leave it in for another couple minutes. So these are done perfectly. You can see they're this nice, gorgeous brown color. And you can put these on baking racks to cool them off. You can sort of dump them out onto your work surface and cool them that way. You can stick these right into the fridge or the freezer, again, if you're pressed for time. So for this frosting recipe, you need 1 8-ounce package of cream cheese and 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of confectioner's sugar. I only have 1 pound here, so I'm going to try to be sort of sparing with it. And then you want just a little bit of salt. That helps to kind of lift the flavor up a little bit so it's not too sweet. So after the salt, you need a little bit of vanilla. About a teaspoon is right. I don't usually measure it. We have some lovely organic vanilla here, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. So then we're also going to have some, I'm using light cream. You can also use milk. You can use water even if you don't have any milk available. So I'm just going to breaking this up a little with the mixer so it's not going to go, because this is going to go everywhere when I start mixing it. So I'm going to just put a little more milk in here. The trick to not making too much of a mess when you're making this kind of frosting is either use an enormous bowl so it doesn't go everywhere, or start with a fair amount of liquid and then add sugar slowly. This frosting, the texture, you want to get it really, really fluffy. The cream cheese makes it very sort of sticky somehow. It's a little tricky to work with, especially if you're using a decorator bag. And for some reason it's stickier than any other kind of frosting. I'm not really sure why that is. I suppose it's because of the texture of the cheese. But you want to just kind of start really slowly. But eventually you're going to turn it to high speed and get it as fluffy as you can. So I'm going to turn the speed up a little. Just get all the lumps of sugar. So we have a fairly runny frosting, and I think that's fine. It'll frost just fine. So there are a number of different ways that you can frost your cupcakes. And earlier we had, the frosting was a fairly thin consistency, but we thickened it up a little because I wanted to be able to show you some different methods. Also, if you do it while they're still warm, the frosting will melt a little bit. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put this over here. And you can just take a little knife, or if you have a frosting spatula, that's fine. But because these feel kind of small to me, I'm just using this little like hors d'oeuvre knife here. And you just can go up here and just kind of, this is the very sort of old school, old fashioned, the kind of cupcakes that if you were, had to bring a tray of goodies to school for some event, this is what your mom made and just like slapped it on there. But now I want to show you how you can actually decorate with a tube, which makes it a little easier to use. I think you get better control with it. These are food grade plastic, and they're pretty easy to wash and keep clean. So you have your bag here. This is, I think, a 12-inch bag. They also come in 10 and 8 and even bigger ones. This is a pretty good size for just doing one batch of cupcakes or a cake. So you want to squeeze this down so that the threads stick out just a little bit. And then you have a tip. There's different kinds of tips you can use. I kind of like to use one of these kind of star ones because that gives you a nice pattern. You put that through this ring here and screw it onto what's called the coupler. So here we go. So you can see the frosting kind of coming out of the end here. You want to make sure that it's all in here kind of solidly. So you just come up on your cupcake here. There's a couple ways you can do this. I usually start in the middle and then just come down and around. And you make a little clockwise swirl. And you can take it out as far as you want it. And it's done. And it's beautiful. Now because this is soft, this is going to melt down a little bit. And also the cupcakes are still a little warm. So I might want to just stick that in the freezer if I wanted it to stay looking just like that. But if you don't mind if it melts a little bit, then don't worry about it. You can also do this kind of thing where you do like these kind of stripes. Do it that way. This takes a little bit longer, but some people like the way this looks. Like that. You can do like this. You can go nuts. This is kind of like the hostess squiggle, on the chocolate cupcake. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can also, if you want just a small amount of frosting on your cupcake, you can just do one little rosette on the top. And that's pumpkin spice cupcakes with cream cheese frosting. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you'll try these as soon as possible at your house.